Oh, I signed in as myself and you signed in as the shul. I'll be right back.
Okay. I won't take it personally.
Mm-hmm.
You got it?
I did. And share screen. Okay, so tonight's share really could take us a year in terms of if we wanted to cover everything, but we're gonna do our best. But before we get started, a couple of introductory remarks. So the first is that my goal for tonight's class is to help familiarize all of you with a sizable sampling of the Makoros that deal with the conversation of abortion indirectly, mostly. There are a couple of sources that deal with it head on, but most of it is going to be somewhat indirectly, and to lay the groundwork so that we understand and appreciate what's happening next week and perhaps the week after when we go through the poskim and how they interpret the range of Talmudic approaches to this question and how they kind of not pick and choose, but how they formulate their argument overall, and what are some of the key moments in the Gemaras that are where these two, at least two, but more at least two trains of thought separate from. So that's going to be kind of the goal. So if you come away feeling like you have a sense of there being a lot of different ways of understanding and also Gemaras that sort of touch on this topic, then I will have succeeded. This is not going to be super organized that you're going to come away having like a real hold on this sugya. And the reason I think that is because there's just a lot. It's just a lot of different pieces, and none of them are so massive by themselves, but when you start adding up all the various conversations, keeping them straight is sometimes a little bit challenging. So I'm going to try to be as clear as possible, but tonight's goal is not for you to have a basic understanding of the real halachic conversations, but it's about the background that is going to be helpful for us, so that next week and the week after, perhaps if we continue this conversation, we have what we need. Second of all, I've heard from different great rabbis that there are different types of halachic questions out there, just like there are different types of medical questions out there. And some of them are answerable by your mom and pop pediatrician, and some halachic questions are answerable by your mom and pop rabbis, like myself. There are other questions that mom and pop rabbis or mom and pop pediatricians can read about and try to decipher and try to present. But for us to stick our heads into the mix as a bar hachi or as a shita of any sort, I think it would be a little bit presumptuous. And so my caveat for this class is that anything that's not clear or that is a lack in how you come away from understanding this topic is a lack in me, not a lack in anything else, and that I'm shooting above my pay grade right now to even be addressing this topic, and please bear with me because of that. The last caveat for this conversation is that I really want this to be a politics-free zone. And I kind of made that pretty clear in the title. And my goal for this class is we're not going to talk about policy or what the American Supreme Court or just the country's policy should be. It's not relevant to our conversation. It's the reason that I chose to talk about this, but it's not relevant to the conversation. What I want to do is I want to really delve into the sources of the Talmud itself, and to try to have an open mind in reading each one of these sources and trying to unpack what is being said. Good. So that's the background. That's my caveats. Those are all of my preambles to the conversation. The questions that I want to hope to touch on over the course of tonight are the following. The first is there a prohibition of terminating the life of a fetus? If there is a prohibition, what is the nature of that prohibition? Is it a biblical prohibition? Is it a rabbinic prohibition? Is there an underlying prohibition behind it? If there is one, what is it? And if it's not clear, what are the possibilities? What is the scope of the prohibition? Meaning, is there a difference between a baby at conception after 40 days, first trimester, when you can feel the baby move, second trimester, third trimester, in labor, the baby's head comes out, the baby's body comes out? At what point, right, this question is being asked has an impact in the halachic process. And one of the things that I found very, very compelling when I was doing research on this topic is that the approach of Aaron Lichtenstein is kind of a sliding scale, right? He doesn't have as clear Kedarko Bakodesh, it's very much like him, but he doesn't have a very super strong, this is what the problem is. He more as like in this section of the pregnancy, these are the potential issues that could arise, and this would be the way to approach this in this section of the pregnancy, and in this section of the pregnancy, and beyond. And so he kind of breaks down that conversation into different sub-conversations, and that you can't have a single conversation. Some of the other poskim that we'll see in the future have more of a black and white approach to this topic, and we'll see kind of their approach as well. The last part of the conversation that we're not going to touch on so much tonight, a little bit, but not so much, or this will come out much more clearly in the very specific questions in the next shiurim, is in what circumstances does the calculus change? We'll have the one major example of this right in the beginning of the class, but for instance, right, if the baby's going to be born with a deformity, or if the baby's going to be born with a condition like Tay-Sachs, where there's no cure and the baby's going to die within 3 to 5 years, or what happens if it's going to lead to severe depression, or what about financial concerns or a danger to the mother? What circumstances, if any, right, change the calculus on how you approach this. Now, this is going to be greatly tied to what the isur is, what the prohibition is. The more you understand the prohibition, the better you understand what circumstances are going to change things. But this conversation is going to be the dynamics of how we're going to approach this. We're going to try to have all these questions in our head as we go through various Gemaras and try to address them in different capacities. Okay. With no further ado, let's jump into the Mekorot. We start off in Maseches Olos, Mishnah, Perek Zayin, Mishnah Vav, 7:6. Ha'isha shehi mekashel layaled. If a woman is having trouble giving birth, right? So she's going through some sort of bad labor situation, and her life is in jeopardy. You can abort the baby. You can cut the baby up while it's in the mother's womb in whatever way you need to, limb by limb, right? Why? Because her life comes before the baby's life. Yatsa rubo, if most of the baby, now this is unclear whether this is most of the baby or most of the baby's head, depending on your interpretation of this line. So, ein nogimbo she'ein dochen nefesh mipnei nefesh. Once the majority of, let's say, the baby's head comes out of the vaginal canal, at that point, you can no longer kill the baby because at this point, it's two equal lives and you can't choose one over the other. So this is, right, I would say probably the case of abortion that you'll have the broadest agreement in the Jewish and non-Jewish world, that if there is a severe risk to the mother, then the mother's life will supersede the baby's life. Now, right, part of the issue of this Mishnah is trying to figure out what changes. What changes once the baby comes out? Right? Meaning, what was the status of the baby before the baby leaves the womb? And what's the status of the baby once it's halfway out? Why, in this case, do we prefer the mother's life? And then once the baby comes out, all of a sudden, we don't quite. Right? So clearly, right, so here I wrote here, my notes to myself. Clearly, if the mother's life is at risk, while the fetus is still in utero, you can abort the baby. So why? Why can you abort the baby? So we have to talk through this. Like, hopefully, we'll have some ideas. But here, let me. If anybody wants to unmute themselves, let's see if I can do this. I have to do this way. I actually know what I can do. I think I can. Let's see if I can do this while we're sharing the screen. Yeah, here we go. Any thoughts?
Well, in my uneducated way, I would just off the top of my head, I was thinking that in the mother's womb, the baby is not yet in this world.
Okay, that is right. So that's a nice way of saying that. Right, maybe the baby is not quite human yet. Maybe it's not in this world. Okay, how you different phraseology. It's not quite in this world yet, so he doesn't have a status to go up against the mom. Something like that.
Right. I mean, we know what would be with the baby if it was born, but it's not quite here yet. It's still a baby in my mind.
Right.
I'm uneducated, but that was my initial thought.
Right. So
also the baby, Rabbi, isn't the baby taught the entire Torah lies inside the womb, or she's inside the womb?
Yeah. I mean, we I mean, that's the Gemara in Nida, right? That the baby is taught the entire Torah while the baby's in the womb. So clearly something's going on in there.
Something's going on. Yeah.
And right, from modern medicine, we also know that the baby is at some point viable, right? We can call it 7 months. We're at some point in the pregnancy, right? The baby could live by itself if it came out. So it might need a little bit of help, but it could make it. So, but from this Gemara, without taking anything else, it sounds like, right, the baby is not quite a competitor against the mother's life at this point. Now, we're going to have to figure out why not. And we're going to see a Gemara that uses this Mishnah towards the end of our class. And it's going to kind of have its own take a little bit on how to understand this. But still, one way of understanding this Mishnah would be to say that the baby is not quite alive yet. Until the baby's out of the womb, the baby's not quite alive yet. And so it's not a nefesh. Once it's out, then it's a nefesh, and then you ein doch a nefesh a nefesh. Now, it makes me a little uncomfortable to say, but if I'm being honest here, that is definitely one interpretation of this Mishnah. So let's keep on going. Yeah.
Well, just one point too, that while the baby is still in the womb, that it's still a part of the mother.
We'll get to there too, also, right? Meaning, perhaps it's some sort of combination, right? It could be a complex calculus here. While the baby is inside the mother, it is on the one hand, right? It's alive, but it's not yet considered a separate entity. So it's kind of like a part of a person that is killing them, right? Like a cancer or whatever.
Rabbi, in Masechtas Chulin, the vlad in the cow, the calf inside the mother is considered an appendage of the mother.
Is considered
an appendage,
right?
Part of the
and if let's say you shecht an animal and the baby's inside, the shechita on the mother is going to count for the baby.
The baby doesn't even require shechita.
Exactly, because meaning you could say that in two different ways. Don't need it already have it, right? The way I prefer to say it is that it already has shechita, even if the shechita of the mother is already worked on it because it was a part of the mother, for sure. Now, one of the things I'm going to say here, and this is a very important point that is going to come across in a lot of different Gemaras, is that this comes from one of my Rebbeim in Shalavim. His name is Rav Nussbacher. So Rav Nussbacher, who is a much older Talmud of my Rebbe, Rav Rosenzweig. So he learned with Rav Rosenzweig many years before I did. And then I learned with him in Shalavim, and then I went to Rav Rosenzweig's shir when I went to YU. But Rav Nussbacher, he codified a whole bunch of what he called kind of Talmudic rules. And one of his rules was Halacha X situation Y. That whenever you have different halachot, that, right, so it could be that the fact that the baby cow is considered a yerech imo, part of a appendage of the mother, that could be, right, a shechita halacha, right? That could be a kashrus halacha, but is that necessarily follow through that we would take that same analysis and apply it in the context of a human fetus? So maybe it's possible, right? But also you can make an okimta, you can make a distinction, right? I'm not going to on one leg try to presume that I can do that, but the postgame, I'm sure, can come up with some distinction as to why it might be true in one context, but not true in another context. And so that's going to be one of the themes that we're going to see play out in some of these Gemaras. Okay, so let's keep on going because we got a lot to cover. So I'm going to mute everybody again, and I'll unmute you when we get to the next conversation point. So second Gemara is Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Nun Zayin Amud Beis. So the Gemara here says the following: Eshkach Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha Davaksiv v'Sefer Agadata de Beirav. So Rabbi Acha bar Yaakov quotes, right, that which was said in a book of Agadata from the Academy of Rav. Ben Noach Nereg B'Dayin Echad, and here's a whole list here of things where a Noahide, right, who is chayiv in the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach. There's a whole bunch of rules that for a Jew, right, cannot be killed by one dayan. Right, he has to have a full court in order to be sentenced to death. But a non-Jew doesn't have the same rules as a Jew, and the non-Jew can die from a single dayan. In the continuation of this conversation, after the quotations from the yeshiva of Rav, it says that Mishum Rabbi Yishmael Amr, they said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, Af al ha'ubrin, that a non-Jew, a Noahide, is also chayiv misa, right, gets capital punishment for killing an ubar, for killing a fetus. Mishum Rabbi Yishmael Amru, Af al ubrin, my time of Rabbi Yishmael. So the Gemara asks, what's the reasoning for Rabbi Yishmael? So he has a drasha from the pasuk. What does the pasuk say? Tichsiv hashafech dam ba'adam ba'adam damo yishafech. So the normal way of reading this is you put the comma right here, right? So you translate is, right? Someone who spills the blood of a person, right? That person's blood will be spilled. However, the way that Rabbi Yishmael reads this is you put the comma after the second ba'adam. So it's hashofech dam ha'adam ba'adam. If somebody spills the blood of a person in a person, then they are chayav misa. If, right, so what is the example of a person in a person? Ezehu adam shehu ba'adam. Have omer ze ubar shebemei imo. This is a fetus. Okay, so the halacha here is that if a Noahide kills a fetus, then the Noahide is punished with capital punishment. Now, let's look at what Rashi says here. Afa ha'ubrin, haka es ha'isha, v'yotzio yiladeha nerag alehen. Right, so you hit a woman and it causes her to miscarry, you would be killed for that. Uvi Yisrael, ad shyatzela avir ha'olam, until a baby enters the air of the world, you're not going to be chayav misa. So if a Jew hits a woman, this is actually, it's a pasuk, but he quotes the Gemara in Nida, right? That if two Jews are fighting and a woman gets in the way, and one of them hits the pregnant woman and causes her to miscarry, so he has a financial obligation to that woman and to her husband, but not certainly not capital murder. So, right, so fascinating. So we're saying now that a ben Noach, according to this Gemara, is going to have a capital punishment for killing a fetus, but a Jew does not seem to have that. Right? Right? So here's the kicker though. Rashi says, what's the reason that a Jew is not chayiv misa? It's for a technicality, because the Jewish law has a technicality, which is that you're only going to be put to death yourself if you kill someone who would be living is not someone who's on their deathbed. Now, a baby who is not yet born is considered still a nefel, or at least a suffix nefel. A nefel means a baby that's never really makes it, right? The baby's born sickly and never really comes to term, never really makes it. So if you kill a baby, a fetus, so it's just like killing a baby that was born early, a preemie, that never really was able to, right, live by itself. If, let's say, you killed that baby, you would not be put to death for that. Now, we all agree, though, right, in those cases, right, let's say a person is right, wait, let's say there's a baby like that. That baby is born as a preemie. Everyone is in agreement that killing said baby is a problem. It's not a capital offense, right, because of a technicality, but that doesn't mean that it's not murder, right? You just don't get the punishment for murder. So that's why this is really, really interesting. How do you understand this Gemara? This Gemara is telling us that when a non-Jew kills a baby, it is problematic to the point that the non-Jew is chayiv misa, basically is a capital offense. Now, do you understand the corollary of that for a Jew, that it's mutter, that it's okay? Or do you understand the corollary of that is that it's patur aval aser, right? Meaning you're not punished, but doesn't mean that it's okay. So that's the two ways of understanding, right? How does this play out for the Jew? So, okay. So the Rambam says, Ben Noach sheharag nefesh afilu ubar b'me'imo nerag alav. Right. So the Rambam plays out this Gemara. He says if a Noahide kills a fetus while it's in its mother's womb, he is killed for that, or she is killed for that. V'chein im harag treifa o shekatfo v'natnu lifnei ha'ari. Right. Similarly, if you kill someone who is going to be dying within a year, or if you capture someone, tie them up and put them in front of a lion, o shinichu b'ra'av ad sheyamos, or you lock someone in a cage and starve them to death. even though in all these cases you didn't biyadayin, you didn't with your hands take them and kill them. Ho vehimis mikol makom nerag. In all these cases, a ben Noach, right? A Noahite is going to be, right? You're going to be, you're called a murderer, and so you're killed. V'cheinim harag rodev sheyochal lahatzilo be'echa meivarav nerag alav. Similarly, if someone's trying to kill you and you're a Noahide, and you have the possibility of maiming that person instead of killing them, then you could be, right? You could be punished with a capital offense if you kill that person instead of maiming them, right? And again, this is assuming that's possible. Masha ein came be Israel. None of these things are true by a Jew, right? So in all these cases, you're not going to be chayev misa. You're not going to have a capital punishment in any of these cases. Now, it doesn't mean again that it's mutter. It just means in all these cases, it's a problem. But in all these cases, there would not be the truth is, in many cases of actual murder, we don't have an actual capital punishment because you need two witnesses. You need to have a warning, right? Those witnesses have to testify and they be found to be true witnesses, and they have to have accurate information. If there's any, right, contradictory testimony or whatnot between the two of them, it could be thrown out. Right, so there are plenty of cases, right? The Jewish law does not say that if you murder someone and don't get caught with two witnesses and a warning, that it's okay, right? But, right, you don't get capital punishment for it. Okay, so this Kesef Mishnah, which we're not going to go into inside, basically just explains that the Rambam, right, understands this because the other view in the Gemara, the other view in this section of Talmud, says that he needs the pasuk of, right, this pasuk that we talked about, right, right, that this is teaching us that the death penalty for non-Jews is hanging, because what's a situation where the blood, right, is spilled in a person, right? In the person, his blood is spilled. It's by hanging, because there's no blood that leaves the body. So that's the drasha, that the alternative drasha that's made on this verse. And the Rambam paskins that the capital punishment for non-Jews is with the sword, it's beheading, and so therefore, right, he agrees with the view of Rabbi Yishmael. That's what the Kesef Mishnah says. It's a detail. It's not really relevant to our point. It was interesting, but we have a lot to do, so we'll just do that outside. Okay, so now there is a issue, because I just said that we have these things that seem to be, at the very least, problematic on a capital level for non-Jews, but for Jews, maybe they're a problem, maybe they're not. Two ways of understanding that Gemara. But even if they're a problem, they're not a capital offense. So there's a famous Gemara in Chulin, and this comes up in other places too in the Gemara, but I think the main section is in Chulin Amud Gimel, Chulin 33, where we have the following svara. The svara says, "Mi ikamidi di Yisrael shari v'obi kochavim aser." This is talking about the context of Ever Menachai, where there are certain halachot about shchita and whatnot. That the basic question is it possible? Right, we have a lot more mitzvot than non-Jews. So you would think that anything that's problematic for a non-Jew should be also problematic for a Jew, because we have more mitzvot. Is it possible for there to be a stringency for a non-Jew that doesn't exist for a Jew? That's basically the question. The assumption of this question in the Gemara is that it's impossible. Is it possible there's something that's okay for a Jew and usher for a non-Jew? So Tosfos, close to our Gemara here, talks about, right, this idea. Leika Meidam, the Yisrael Shari, right? Is it possible that something could be okay for a Jew? And basically Tosfos says that, right, B'davar shu mitzvah Yisrael lo amrinan hachi. So if there's a mitzvah involved, it's possible that there might be, right, a loophole out of creating a exacting halacha. If it's something that's true for a non-Jew, it should be true for a Jew too? Not necessarily. If there's a mitzvah involved for the Jew, then that could change the calculus one way or the other. And then he talks about our case, the ha'ubrin, and by the fetuses, the ovi kochavim chayev Yisrael pater, right? So Afal gav de pater mikol makom lo shari. Right. So basically, if you literally translate this verse, this line of questioning from Chulin, the Gemara can't imagine that something would be allowed for a Jew and not allowed for a non-Jew. In other words, right, what Tosfos is saying is that the preferred reading of this Gemara that we just did is not that killing an ubar is okay for a non-Jew, but is okay for a Jew, but not okay for a non-Jew. No, that's not a good reading, because mi'ikamidi. What do you mean? They're supposed to? Is it possible that something could be okay for a Jew, but not okay for a non-Jew? That doesn't make any sense. However, it could be that the punishment level and or right the what exactly the isser is might not be the same. So, in other words, while a non-Jew has a capital punishment, a Jew might not have a capital punishment, but that doesn't mean that it's okay for the Jew. It's not okay for the Jew. Now, here's the problem, and this is where so much of the debate rides on these silly little few words, right? Mikamakom lo shari, right? It's not okay for the Jew. Why is it not okay for the Jew? Meaning, are we saying that this is murder, right? It's just like murder for the non-Jew. It's murder for the Jew, but there's a technicality that says you don't get punished. Or is there some other isser here, right? Honestly, the isser could be this concept of mi'ikamidi, the Yisrael Shari lo kochav maser, right? This could be a rabbinic law in its own right, that, right, whenever there's something that seems to be okay for a Jew and usser for a guy, the rabbi said that can't be. That can't be. So it must be not okay for a Jew too. Now, I'm going to unmute everybody again, but if it's not murder, does anybody have any suggestions for what the isser could be for aborting this fetus? Any other possible thoughts?
Endangering the mother.
Endangering the mother. So in this case, actually, there doesn't seem to be any endangerment to, meaning this is not the same case as the original case where there was a mother who was having a bad pregnancy and so were allowed to miscarry for the sake of the mother. Here we're saying you're hitting, meaning something happened and you hit the mother's right
I'm not getting
womb,
it.
and somehow when you did that, you caused the baby to be aborted. So for a non-Jew, you get a capital offense for that, according to the Gemara here. And it sounds like for a Jew, you don't get a capital punishment, but it's still problematic. So the question is, why is it problematic? Is that still considered murder, but there's no punishment for technicality? Or is there some other problem? Maybe there's a different isser here? What is the other possibility for what the isurim could be? Any thoughts?
I mean, you could look at Darchei Shalom. You could
Explain.
look at, in other words, because it wouldn't look right that you are preferring a Jew over a non-Jew, and it would cause problems with Jews and their neighbors in the non-Jewish world.
So interesting. So let me just follow up for a second. So in what we're saying here is that if a non-Jew kills a Jewish fetus or a non-Jewish fetus, he gets capital punishment. But if a Jew kills a Jewish fetus or a not Jewish fetus, it would be a problem, but there would be no capital punishment. So I don't know that there's a difference here, meaning the difference is whether there's capital punishment for killing the baby, but the Jewish status or the non-Jewish status, I don't think makes a difference, because for the non-Jew, either way, he's going to be chayav misa, and for the Jew, either way, he's not going to be chayav misa.
But I'm not sure I understood. I understand when you say mikol makom lo shari, that what you're doing is you're making some sort, a Jewish judge is making a distinction between a Jew and a non-Jew.
So
Right.
And
I mean, if anything, he's actually making it closer together, right? Meaning the more extreme way of reading the Gemara was to say that it's mutter. It's okay for a Jew to kill a fetus. Now,
right,
if you read it that
that's what
way,
I'm saying.
yeah.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. That's why it says mikol makom lashari. If I understand that correctly, it's saying you can't treat one different from the other because it could cause a lot of problems with the non-Jewish neighbor. You can't treat the non-Jewish neighbor harsher than you treat the Jew.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Right,
Because
meaning
of
so
dark
the
age child.
only problem is that it doesn't really solve the harshness, right? Because even if it's lo shari, it's still not a capital offense. So we're still not going to kill the Jew, even if we say it's a problem.
Okay.
Right.
So I'm just going to throw out a couple of different possibilities that have been suggested because a whole bunch. There's like 6 or 7 different possibilities that people throw out here. So
Yeah, well, Rabbi Neuman, sorry.
yeah, please.
Well, Sheva's business really nice. I mean, if a non-Jew steals, he gets bisa.
Oh, good. So I was thinking about that also. I haven't seen anyone talk about that. Right. The reality is that by all the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the punishment is capital. So, right, how much can you surmise from that? Right, meaning even for the non-Jew, the issue is that which one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach does this fall under? So l'chora it falls under murder, right?
Right.
L'chora. Right. If you had some other of the one, meaning it would be really interesting. What I haven't seen anyone do is suggest that the non-Jew is going to be put to death, even though it's not murder for the non-Jew, it's something else. Right.
Yeah.
That would be a really interesting.
There's no chiluk here. He commits any offense like that, he dies. He's put to death.
I understand that. But within the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, which one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach is he being put to death for? Ritzicha.
Ritzicha is what he's being put to death for in a case of killing a fetus. Yes.
A fetus, exactly.
Right.
Meaning,
Yeah.
what I would be fascinated by is if, let's say, someone said that this was a case, right? Well, what's the problem here? It's gezel. You stole a baby.
Yeah.
Right, and so really, the non-Jews being put to death here because of gezel, not because of ritzicha. That would be fascinating.
That'd be something, yeah. Because
I haven't seen anybody say that. Everybody assumes that that what's happening here is that the non-Jewish definition of murder has a greater expansiveness to include killing a fetus. Now, the implication of that is that if you took that piece, the implication of that is that the fetus is alive, right? And then if that's true, and you're following that through to a Jew, so what's the isser for the Jew? It's also murder, but because of a technicality, there's no capital punishment, but it's still murder. If that's true, if it's still considered murder, then you're going to have a very particular way of looking at abortion. If abortion is considered murder, then it's going to be very hard to find areas where we're going to say, you know what, we're makel because of these circumstances. There's almost no circumstances you're going to come up with, except for the death of the mother, right, where we're going to say it's okay. But the thing is that the Tosfos doesn't say that the language of Tosfos is pretty weak. If this is really murder for the Jew, but murder with a technicality, therefore no capital punishment, then to use this language of mikol makom lo shari, nevertheless, it's not okay.
yeah,
Right? That's like the lamest murder line I've ever seen in my life, right? Right. It's murder, so nevertheless, at the end of the day, right, you can't do it. Oh, thanks. You just tell me it's murder. I know I can't do it. Even if I don't get a death penalty for doing it, doesn't mean that it's okay. So let me just spill the beans a little bit. So some of the other takes on this is maybe it's something like Chabala, right? Maybe the Isser here is right? The prohibition that's happening here for a Jew to kill a fetus is the same isser there is to punching someone in the face, right? It's an isser chavala. You're causing a wound to somebody. So if you're causing somebody a wound, it's not allowed either, and it's not a capital offense.
For a Jew, unless it's your
right?
father or mother. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, unless it's your father. That's true. Right. Again, and there's a technicality in the opposite direction.
Mhm.
Right. So another possibility is that this is an expansion of, right, Hotzah zer levatala is what some poskim say, right? That a non-sexual encounter with your wife, so ejaculation is going to be problematic if it's not in the context of sex with your wife. So if perhaps, right, a pumped up version of that is not just killing the seed, not just killing the sperm, but killing a fully fertilized egg that is an embryo, now a fetus, right? So that would be an even more extreme version of a pumped up version of, right, the Isser of Hotzah zer levatala. So much so that I saw quoted that there was one posting that suggested that if you're going to have to do an abortion for some reason or another, better to have a woman do the abortion. You should have female doctors doing the abortion, because a woman is not held liable for Hotzah zer levatala, right? Again, really interesting, like very random take on this. But the point is that if these things, if the Isser here is not murder, right, you also have things like a Vizrayu de Ritzicha, right, that it might be, right, a subcategory that's not quite murder, but is, right, a subcategory of murder. The other possibility is that it's an Isser Aseh, right, that there's a positive commandment of, right, Lo Samo Adam Reyacha. You can't stand idly by when someone's life is in jeopardy. Right. So let me ask you a different question. If a woman is pregnant, right, and she's having some sort of issues with the baby on Shabbos, do we allow her to be Machal Shabbos?
Yes.
Yeah, we allow her to be Machal Shabbos for the baby. So how can we let her be Machal Shabbos for the baby? Right.
Nefesh for the mother.
What?
It's pikuach nefesh for the mother because the baby is a rodef.
Sometimes it's pikuach nefesh for the mother, but there are cases where it's not pikuach nefesh for the mother, but pikuach nefesh for the baby. And even in such a case, we still allow her to go to be Mechal Shabbos on a Deraisa level.
Right.
Right. Even if it wasn't pikuach nefesh for the mother.
Okay.
Right. So.
Right.
So it could be that what's the Isser here? The Isser here is an Isser Aseh of not, right, you're not saving, right, this fetus. So that it's not about Ritzicha, it's not murder, but it's also not, it's the negation of saving. Right? So, and the reason that would be very significant is because if it's an Aseh, then you have a lot more flexibility. Right? You have a lot more flexibility to push aside an Aseh in extenuating circumstances like tsar, if there's a certain amount of pain, both emotional and real, and other factors that you can play this out. But so this right here, this line of Mikol Malkum Lo Shari, it's like it's massive in terms of the amount of ink spilt on what Tosfos means and the ramifications of it. We'll see it play out on both sides of the debate. Any other thoughts before we move on from this source? So let me just review the takeaways from this source, because it's a little bit of a long conversation. So this second Gemara talks about the fact that for a ben Noach, a Noahide, if a Noahide kills a fetus, that is a capital punishment. Now, when a Jew does the same thing, you can have two ways of interpreting this Gemara. Either you say it's mutter, it's totally okay. If you say that, then you have to say something along the lines of saying that for the Jew somehow the fetus is not considered like a living thing. otherwise it's hard to understand how it could be totally mutter. But the general consensus, we're going to see two lines in another Tosos that are very, again, very troubling, and because of that, right, also create a stir of interesting debate. But other than this two lines of Tosfos, it seems to be pretty clear that the overwhelming majority of Rishonim and Poskim agree with this Tosfos that it's not okay for a Jew to kill a fetus. But the question is, what's the problem? Is the problem bona fide murder, but you get off on a technicality? Or is it some lesser isser, right? An isser like chabala, like causing damage to somebody's body, or hotzah zer levatala in a some sort of pumped up version of, right, causing, right, the loss of seed? Or is it an isser aseh? Is it it's the lack of the positive commandment of saving something? So by killing it, right, or causing it to die, it's the right, you've been mevatel and aseh, you've canceled a positive commandment to save and protect.
Rabbi Neuman, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
If it's one of those three categories, so then why would the guy get capital punishment?
So, similar point to what David was saying earlier, is that if it's considered a part of any expansion of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, a non-Jew gets capital punishment for anything. The issue is figuring out what the non-Jew, right? Meaning, somehow it's still, yeah.
In Isra, is there any concept? Are any of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach an aseh?
No. Meaning the way to see what we're doing here is we're actually creating a distinction. We're saying on the one hand, this is problematic for a non-Jew on as a issue of ritzicha, and for a Jew it's problematic, but it's not murder. It's problematic for some other reason, right? That could be for any of these reasons. It also could be, right, a completely rabbinic expansion based off of this concept that we brought up from, right, the Gemara in Chulin, that we can't have something that's mutter for a Jew if it's usher for a guy. So, right, meaning the whole creation of the Isser is because we can't have that imbalance. It doesn't make sense. We have 613 mitzvahs, they have 7. It can't be that this is actually something that's okay for us, but problematic for them. So we make it usher, even though it doesn't take on the same status of this expanded definition of murder. Okay, so let's move on from this makor to we're gonna touch on this Tosfos very briefly. I mentioned this Tosfos just a few moments ago, but this Tosfos is one of these Tosfosin that gets quoted a lot because it creates the basis for some poskim saying that abortion in many cases is okay. So the Tosfos is found in Nida Daf Mem Daled Amud Beis. This is the Gemara about specifically there being a problem of killing a baby after it's been born for a day. If you remember, it got quoted in Rashi above. So Tosfos here says, V'im Tomar, Im Timse Lomar Demuter Lahorgo Bebeten, Afilu Meta Imo. So, right, let me just read that question again. V'im Tomar, and if you're going to tell me, if you want to tell me that it's mutter, it is okay to kill the baby while it's in its mother's womb, right? So this is not, this line right here, the mutter lahargo bebeten, is sounding like it's reading our Gemara that we just finished before as saying that it's usher for a non-Jew, it is problematic for a non-Jew, and is in fact mutter for a Jew. It is actually okay for a Jew. That's a pretty crazy reading. Like I said, this is the only place in the Rishonim that anyone uses this type of language. He actually does it twice. And we're actually going to see either next week or the week after how the viewpoint that thinks that abortion, in the poskim, the viewpoint that thinks abortion is tantamount to murder. So they don't know what to do with this Tosfos. They basically say it has to be a Tos Sofer. It has to be a mistake, which is a very dangerous, right, type of argument, because you undermine a lot of the tradition, when you start kind of anything that doesn't agree with your perspective, you just call it a mistake. But we'll deal with that when we deal with that. So that was just kind of the final piece. Oh, and then there's this Rashba also. I wanted to show you that another confounding factor in all of this, which kind of fits in with this conversation, is whether or not mi'ika midi is something that we actually even paskin like or not. This concept that if something is not okay for a non-Jew, does it have to also not be okay for a Jew? So the Chidushei Rashba says that if you can come up with a reason to make a distinction, then you're totally in the right to make the distinction, right? So let's just read this quickly inside. Amina had taima de kamar, klomar keva de taima kamar lo shayach lamimar mi'ika midi. So basically, once you give a reason, right? Once you have an explanation, you don't have to say that everything is exactly the same. If you have an explanation for why it's not the same, then you can say that's not the same, right? Kedamrina b'Sanhedrin, Leka Meidam di Yisrael Shari v'lenachri Aser, Uparach v'arei Yifas Torah di Yisrael Shari v'lenachri Aser, right? So it brings up the obscure case of a Jew who goes to war. He can take, right, a captive wife, and there's a whole host of strange halachot applied to that. So apparently that's okay for a Jew, but would be problematic for a non-Jew. So how does that work? How can something be okay for a Jew and not okay for a non-Jew? Mishani hasam yishum delav b'nei kivush ninhu, that non-Jews don't have the status of taking over extra land, which apparently is what triggers this Yifas Torah. The details of this I'm not going to get into right now. The point though is, right, uvechulu yayiv taima alma deika taima lekulak shuye. Right, this is the bottom line. We see from this that if you have a reason to say the Jew and the non-Jewish law are different, then you don't have to say they're exactly the same. Right. Another example of this is by shchita. So there's when an animal first is slaughtered, sometimes an animal will be mefarches, will be writhing on the floor. So there's a whole conversation about whether or not, if the animal is still moving around on the floor and you somehow, right, take a piece of the animal and quickly roast it and throw it in your mouth, is that called Eiver min hachai or not? Is that called eating food, eating part of an animal that from a live animal? Even though the animal is dead, but still the certain twitching that's happening in the animal doesn't go away for a little bit of time, right? Chicken running with its head cut off, that type of thing. So the reality is in that halacha, we're getting very off topic, so I'll come back in a second. But the halacha in that area is that for a Jew, once shechita happens, you're good to go. For a non-Jew, if they kill the animal, but however they kill the animal and it's still being mefarches, it's still writhing, the non-Jew can't eat from that animal until it stops. Right? So there's a whole conversation there is about how shechita is different from other things, that once you have the mitzvah, you create the distinction. So that's just a long way of saying, if you have a reason to say there's a distinction between Jewish and non-Jewish law, it is possible that in some minor details, or in this case, a major detail, right, Jewish and non-Jewish law can be different. And Jewish law could be more makel, could be more lenient for one reason or another. Okay. Gemara 3. Right, and this is actually the Gemara that we just talked about in Tosfos, but we'll see this Gemara now inside. So the Gemara says, Tinokes bas yom echad. If you have a baby girl that is 1 day old, and we can skip some of the details here, and it's same is true for a baby boy, Tinok ben yom echad. So a lot of these halachot apply to a baby that is 1 day old, and one of the halachos that apply is v'hahorgo chayav. If you kill that baby, you are guilty of murder and you can be put to death. The implication of this is that if a baby is killed before 1 day old, meaning in utero, then you would not again get punished as a capital offense. Again, does this mean that it is okay? No, it's not okay, but it's not going to be punishment. It's not going to be punished with death. So again, it's just another source that would kind of flip back to the same conversation. Well, then what is the problem? Is it murder with technicality, or is it some other problem? Right. So again, this is just a a rehashing of the same conversation. So the Rambam on this conversation has the following to add. Echad hahoreg es hagadol, o es hakatan, ben yomo, ben zachar ben akiva, harei ze nerag alav im harag bizadon. Right? So if you kill a adult or a child that's 1 day old, male or female, right, and you do it on purpose, then you're going to get killed. You're going to get bichayev misa for that. O gola im harag b'shogeg, b'shaga. If you do it by mistake, then you're going to go into exile. V'hu shekalu chadashav, and that's only if the baby was born full term. Aval nola b'fachos mitisha chadashim, but if it was born less than 9 months, harehu knefel. It's only, again, it's like a baby that never quite, it's not considered a fully alive child yet, right? Because it's never been fully healthy. So therefore, again, there's a technicality that if you killed such a baby, you would not be put to death. That does not mean it's okay. It's still murder, right? This baby is alive. It has been born. But if you killed it, technically you're not going to be chayiv misa. Ad sheyisha shloshim yom, until, right, the baby lasted for at least 30 days. V'horgo b'toch shloshim yom eino nereg alav. You're not going to be killed for it, right? So here, again, you see the way to deal with these Gemaras is to say this is not teaching you about the status of the ubar. It's not teaching you about the status of the fetus, right? Meaning, again, two ways of understanding this Gemara. Is this Gemara teaching us that a baby before it is born is not alive and therefore is not subject to murder? Or are we saying that it is subject to murder? We do consider it alive, but because it's not fully there, it's not 100% there, right? It's not subject to capital punishment. That's the difference. That's part of this conversation that you have to have again and again and again. Is this about the punishment, or is this about the isser? Is the isser toned down? Is it not murder? Or no, it's murder. It sure is. It's murder, but it's not quite on the same level. Okay. Another interesting Gemara, and this is going to be another example where we use the concept of halacha X situation Y, right? That you're going to have a conversation about a very specific area of halacha and whether or not we can extrapolate from that area of halacha to all over Jewish law, right? So many of you are probably familiar with the idea of a baby becomes a baby after 40 days. So have you ever wondered where that comes from? It comes from a very strange, specific conversation in Yevamos, Daf Samach Tet Amud Beis. The Gemara says, "Binisuin mi chashashu." So this is talking about a girl who is the daughter of a Kohen. So the daughter of a Kohen is allowed to eat truma. However, once she gets married, if she gets married to a non-Kohen, she can no longer eat truma, right, while she's married to this non-Kohen. So what happens if, right after she gets married to this non-Kohen, soon thereafter, the guy passes away suddenly, right? So can she go back reverting to eating truma or not?
Depends if
So
she's pregnant or not.
yeah. So exactly. So that's going to be part of the conversation. So if she gets pregnant, if she had a baby, so then she's permanently removed. If not, then she can revert back to her original status. But here's the conversation. We're not concerned with marriage. V'hatanya, we learned in a brisa, Bas Kohen shenises Yisrael umeis. If a daughter of a Kohen marries a Jew and then passes away, toveles ve'ocheles bitruma la'erev. She can go to the mikvah and then she can eat truma that very night. Amar Rav Chisda, toveles ve'ocheles ad 40 yom. Rav Chisda said she can eat for 40 days. Di lo mibra, halo mibra, because if she's not pregnant at this point, right, then she's not going to be pregnant at all, right, because the guy's dead. So we don't have to worry about her getting pregnant and losing her status of being able to eat truma. Vi mibra, and if she in fact is pregnant, ad arba'im maya ba'almahi, until 40 days, the baby is merely considered, the embryo is just like water. Right, so it's not yet a life. It's not yet considered enough to cause her to be now no longer viable to eat truma. So again, this line by itself, ad arba'im maya ba'almahi, right, until 40 days, the baby, the embryo is considered water, is a very compelling line taken out of context that something changes in the status of a baby from 0 to 40 days. But the question is this a truma halacha or is this a embryo life halacha, right? How do you understand this line, right? Is this really teaching you something about Vladim everywhere, or Vlado everywhere, right? Of every single baby, or is this a specific halacha in the context of eating truma? And the answer is I don't know, right? Like you can understand it either way, but based off of this concept, you will find many poskim who have a different set of standards for what they consider an abortion before 40 days and after 40 days, because of this idea of maya ba'almahi, that maybe, right, it's just considered water. Okay, so let's keep on going. We still have a decent amount of material to cover, so maybe we'll spend a little bit more time on some of the stuff and a little bit less time on some of the stuff, but let's keep on going for now. Okay, so the Gemara in Erech Dav Zayin Amud Aleph. Mishnah says, "Ha'isha sheyatza lehareg ein mamtinin la ad shetelet." So you have a pregnant woman who is chayev misa. You have a pregnant woman who did something that she is now supposed to be put to death. She's pregnant. So the court wants to know, should they wait for her to give birth or not before they execute her? Okay, so the Mishnah says, so, right, so if she's on the birthing stool, we'll wait for her. Meaning if she's literally giving birth now, we'll wait for her. But if not, we don't wait for her. So the Gemara here says, and this somebody brought up earlier, pshita. So the Gemara says, pshita. This is obvious. Gufahi. The baby is merely a part of her. So she's chayav misa. So we kill her. We don't have to worry about it. So what do we say? It's drich. We need this because salka daita chamina. I would have thought hol v'ksiv akasher yashis alav bal haisha mamona de balhu v'lo lifsedei mine kamash malan. So why would I have thought that we should wait for the baby to be born? So if you're asking me what I would have said was, I would have said, because I would have thought the baby's alive. And you don't want to kill the baby. The baby didn't do anything wrong. But that's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says there's a halacha. If two men hit each other, or were hitting each other, and a woman gets in the way, and they cause her to miscarry, then they have to pay, right? The man who hits the woman's and causes her to miscarry has to pay for the damages to the mother and her husband. Okay, so I would have thought that the husband of this baby, right? This baby has a value to the husband, a monetary value, and so I would have thought that just because she's chayav misa doesn't mean that he should lose out on the monetary value of the baby, and therefore, right? I would have said that we should wait before we kill her. Kamash malan, that we don't wait. That's why it's not obvious. Now, that's a really strange Gemara. And, right, for someone who says that this is murder, right, if you say that killing the baby is murder, so this Gemara is really hard to understand. What's going on? I don't understand. If it's murder to kill a baby, then why doesn't that even get brought up in the Gemara? Or is it? Right? The Ema Hachanami. So maybe we should say, yeah, we should wait. Amar Rabbi Ava, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Kra, B'maso gam shnehem, the rabbis is avlad. Vaymi ba'ilei, ad sheyushneim shavin. Divrei Rabbi Yoshia, ki kamar migam. Right? So came into Akar Gufa, Achrinahu. Right? So right? So I don't understand. Why does it change when the baby is coming out? Why is it changed when the baby's coming out of the womb? All of a sudden, we say that we have to wait now. We shouldn't wait. No, because once the baby's coming out, gufa achrinahu. At that point, the baby's considered a different person, right? So again, very similar to the nefesh, right? Tachas nefesh. We can't push away one life for another life. Okay, so very similar conversation. And again, right? How do you understand this? How do you make sense of this Gemara? If it's murder, you'd think that this conversation would get kiboshed. So we'll have to get into this a little bit. Okay. Right. And so again, like I said before, we're not going to come out of tonight's class with a very clear understanding. My point of this is trying to show you that when the poskim had to try and answer this question, they have to deal with so many conflicting nuances in so many different Gemaras, and they have to try to balance, right, all of these different factors in trying to figure out what the appropriate halacha is. And that's why I said it's way above my pay grade in trying to come to a bottom line. Do we understand, right? One Gemara, it has an impact on how you understand a different Gemara, has an impact on how you understand a different Gemara, and how do you put them all together? Okay. Gemara in Sanhedrin Ayin Beis Amid Beis. Amar Rav Huna, Katan Harodif Nitan Letzil Benafsho. So this is, like I said earlier, that very first Gemara that we talked about, which, right, we talked a little bit about how there's a mother who's having a tough pregnancy. So if the baby's still in the womb, you can cut the baby up, evarim, right, piece by piece, to save the mother. Once the baby is coming out, right, remember it was ruvo, right? Most of the baby's coming out. At that point, we can't choose one life over another life. So this Gemara in Sanhedrin takes that Mishnah and runs with it a little bit. So Amar Rav Huna says, Katan harodef nitan latzil benafsho. So if a katan, right, is pursuing someone to kill them, then you can kill the katan to save the person that the katan is pursuing. So Rashi understands this case to be the case of that Mishnah in Erechim, right? Be'isha hamekashe leile misukenes, right? So it's just talking about a woman who's having a tough pregnancy and she is in jeopardy. Ukutani reisha chaya poshetes yada v'chodchos motzia evarim v'chozman shelo yatza la'avir ha'olam, and this is a really important line, lav nefeshu, right? So Rashi says that as long as the baby's still inside, even if he sticks out a hand, but not most of it, right? So you can cut it up and piece by piece to save the mother. Why? Because as long as it doesn't enter into the air, it's kind of similar to a little bit what Irving was saying, a little bit, right? It hasn't entered this world yet, the avir ha'olam. So this is the part that I added to what Irving said, lav nefeshu. Maybe the baby's not considered, right, a life yet. The nitan lahorgo, and you can kill the baby, lahatzilas imo, specifically to save the mother. Again, it still might be problematic for one reason or another, but in the context of saving the mother, it's going to be okay. About yatsa rosho, but once the baby's head exits, right back in the Gemara, right? Eser Chesed Rav Huna, yatsa rosho. Once the head exits, einogim, but you can't touch the baby anymore, right? So this Gemara says yatsa rosho. The previous Gemara said yatsa ruvo. So that's where that conversation about what is ruvo is ruvo de rosho, or is it ruvo of the body? Right, we say the majority, so the majority of the head or majority of the whole baby. Here it says once the head comes out, right? Maybe because babies' heads are so big, it's like ruvo. I don't know. Ein nogimbo lefi she'ein doche nefesh mifnei nefesh. Same language of the Gemara earlier, of the Mishnah earlier. V'amai. So why is that? Rodev who isn't the baby? So right. So here the Gemara asks the question that we wanted to ask earlier. I don't understand. We said the baby can get killed while the baby is in utero because the baby's a rodef. The baby is pursuing the mother's life. So we can kill the baby. Okay. Once the baby's coming out, the mother's life is still in jeopardy. But we say now all of a sudden, right, ain't nogim, but you can't touch the baby. I understand. The baby's still a rodef. Nothing's changed. He's still pursuing the mother. So why can't you kill the baby at that point? It's still pursuing the mother. So the Gemara says, shiny hasam. No, that's different. The mishmaya karadfila. Once the baby's out of the womb, now it's not considered like the baby is being rodef anymore. Now it's shamayim, heaven, is considered the pursuer here, right? This is just how the world works. The baby's coming out and the mother's life is in jeopardy, but that's not the baby's fault, right? The baby's not pursuing the mother. The baby is trying to just enter the world. Clearly, God has other plans here. So God and heaven is considered the rodef here, not the baby once the baby is coming out. Now, why isn't this true while the baby is still in the womb? So that's why Rashi introduces, right, this idea of lav nefeshu, that the baby is not a nefesh yet. But what's fascinating, and this Rambam has had so much ink spilled over it, but we're not gonna spend so much time on it, but you really could spend a lot of time on this. Hare zu mitzvahs lo saseh shelo lachos al nefesh harodef. Right, so there's a mitzvah lo taseh, that you should not have any mercy on the life of a rodef, on the life of someone who's pursuing. Lefichach, therefore, and this is an important line in the Rambam. When the Rambam uses the language of lefichach, he's often saying that this is the reason, not a reason, but the reason. Horu chachamim sha'ubra shehi makshe leiled muter lachto cha'ubar b'me'eha bein bisam bein biyad. Therefore, the rabbis paskined that an ubar, a fetus that is causing difficulties for the mother to give birth to, and putting the mother's life in jeopardy, you can cut the baby up inside her womb, whether by giving her some sort of medical thing that's going to kill the baby, or if you actually go in there and do the act. Because the baby is like a rodef after to kill her. Ve'im mishahotzi rosho ein nogimbo she'ein dochin nefesh miptei nefesh. At that point, we no longer can make that call, because now it's two lives and you can't push away one life for another. V'zeu tivo shalom, and this is just the way of the world. So the fact that the Rambam only talks about rodef and doesn't do kind of what Rashi does here of saying lav nefeshu, is going to become another one of these big conversations. The Rabbi Kiva Eger, right, didn't understand why the Rambam just sticks with the rodef idea. He's got a long conversation here, and then Rav Chaim has a long conversation here too. There's a lot of ink was spilled on this Rambam, and the Rambam is going to end up being one of the major pieces of the side that says that we consider abortion murder, and the only time, right? Meaning, think about this for a second. If you say that, right, what's the reason that you can abort the baby, is because the baby's a rodef. Rodef is the one thing that can override, right, murder, right? Because that's in real life too. If someone's pursuing you, you can murder them, right? And you can kill them. It's okay. If they're trying to kill you, you can kill them first, right? That's the halacha. So if that's true, then that overrides murder. And you never have any conversation about the status of the ubar being not quite a nefesh, like you have in Rashi and some of the other Rishonim in the Rambam. You never find him kind of downplaying the status of the ubar. So there are many who say that the Rambam believed that, in fact, killing the baby is actually, right, by definition, murder, and that therefore, right, the only case where you're going to have a kula, the only case that you're going to be able to do anything is when the baby is considered a rodef. Once the baby comes out, so then, right, you have that's no longer the baby being rodef, that's from Shemayim. So that's going to be a very important factor that we're going to see also play out in the Rishonim, in the poskim. Okay, so let me try to summarize before we conclude. So tonight we went through a slew of Gemaras, Gemara in Erechim, Sanhedrin, a couple in Sanhedrin, Gemara Nida, and the overall body of work in the Gemaras is that you basically have right, two different conversations. One conversation seems to imply that when it comes to aborting a fetus, that would be murder. Now, you don't get capital punishment for it. You're not punished the same way because of certain technical realities of how Jewish law works, but it'd be tantamount to murder. But then we have a whole bunch of other Gemaras that seem to talk about the ubar, talk about the status of the baby as money, as right a not full nefesh, as not quite being right alive, not quite being in this world. All sorts of these nuances that seem to downplay the possibility that maybe it's not murder. Maybe the baby's not quite alive. So the baby's not quite alive, it's not murder. So the reason there's no capital punishment is not because it's murder with technicality, but it's because it's not murder. Doesn't mean it's okay, unless you write that those couple line in Tosfos and that one way of reading the Gemara about the capital punishment for non-Jews, and that it's that the corollary that maybe it's mutter for Jews, that one way that Tosfos, those two lines in Tosfos where he seems to say that. But everywhere else, we saw it's problematic, but it's not murder per se. Maybe it's something else. Maybe the baby is not quite right. It's part of the mother. It's gufa. It's gufahi, right? It's part of the mom, right? As David pointed out early on, in the context of shchita, and we saw in the context of if a woman is pregnant when she's chayiv misa, right? So we saw these different Gemaras that have these slight nuances. Now, we've noted in many of the Gemaras that they're talking about a particular context. They're talking about a particular case. And so it's possible that the conversation in that place is limited to that particular area of Jewish law and doesn't necessarily extrapolate to all other formats of saying that a fetus is 100% alive or a fetus is 100% not alive. You can't necessarily extrapolate. Maybe in this context one thing, in that context another thing. Right? It's possible that the obligation to save the baby is going to apply in one capacity, at the same time that maybe there's not quite a problem of murder on that same fetus. Right? There's a strange reality that on the one hand, a Shabbos question might answer one way, but a different question might answer a different way. And that's going to be part of this challenge that the post are going to have to deal with when they get into the nitty-gritty. The last piece that we only saw a little bit of in terms of Mekoros is the possibility of there being different stages. So at least in the Gemara, we saw, the Maya Ba'alma Gemara about 40 days. We saw Yatza Rosho. We saw Yatza Ruvo, as all being different status changes to the baby. And we didn't see it here, but we'll see in some of the poskim, who are, again, they're also using modern medicine and what they know about modern medicine in terms of the viability of different fetuses at different points, that it could be that this whole conversation is all actually true, that it's not mutually exclusive. It's not that we consider killing a fetus. We consider aborting a fetus. We consider that murder. Maybe at one point in the pregnancy, that might be turned into murder. But maybe at some earlier point in the pregnancy, it's just considered hashchata zera levatala. And maybe at some point it's considered chavala. Maybe multiple possible, isurim are at play at the same time, But there are extenuating circumstances when those things can be, pushed aside. So my goal tonight was just to highlight the complexity of the topic, the variety of perspectives that you're going to come out of just from learning the primary Gemaras and asking questions, and trying to highlight some of the key lines in some of the medieval commentators that are going to come back in the weeks to come when we go back to this topic in the poskim, so that when we see them there, it's not the first time that we've seen them, so that we have a little bit of familiarity and we appreciate what's happening, So, to give you one example, when Rav Moshe Feinstein is going to quote that Tosfos, those few lines of the Lo Shari, and he quotes those lines as if they say that it's tantamount to murder right, we'll know that that line in Tosfos is not so clear, right? Because we talked about how there's a lot of ways to interpret those couple of words. So that might not be his best source and proof, right? And we'll appreciate some of that. So we're going to get into the various sides, and hopefully next time we'll present a very clear kind of, again, the way that each side presents their case. They kind of start from a certain starting point, and they have to dismiss some of the other sources. So we'll try to present the two sides. I'm still not sure whether it's going to be both sides presented side by side, or if we're going to do just one side next time and then just the other side the time after. I'm still toying with both possibilities, but I hope that you came away with appreciating the complexity, appreciating the range, appreciating that when we analyze a question like this in Jewish law, there are so many angles and nuances, and trying to really come to a working definition is a lot harder than sometimes we're willing to admit.
Shkoyach, Rabbi. Shkoyach. Very well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Very
Okie
complex.
dokie.
Shkoyach.
Have a great night, everybody.
Yep.
Thank
Night.
you.